on Facebook. This is the Pandemic Pantry with Chef Chandler. We have on the books Texas Caviar, which is one of my favorite things in the world because it's really flexible. And then we're going to make something really nice called Marillenknodel, which is a dessert from Austria. But because I was thoroughly inspired from the corn cocktail from my class earlier, I made a bunch of other things with corn that I'm just going to present somewhere amid this class and just kind of talk about them, because corn is probably the singular most versatile ingredient out there, but most people aren't aware of how versatile it can be. But for the Texas Caviar, very simple. The Pandemic Pantry classes usually get posted with a flyer that goes on the Underground Cooking Club. I try to share it in the Pandemic Pinup Happy Hour as well. And it comes complete with prep instructions and ingredient lists for if you go shopping. And then I just give you the quantities, give or take, while we're cooking together. So in this bowl here, I have baked, black-eyed peas that have been cooked. My English is terrible today. However, I did not include a recipe on how to cook the black-eyed peas. I think it's very subjective. So I cooked these in a combination of broth, and I just kind of threw in little things that I had in the fridge. I had the end of an onion, a carrot, some bay leaves, some sage. I seasoned them with smoked paprika, powdered garlic, and powdered onion, a little bit of cayenne pepper, and some salt, and then just strained them. So this is just the beans themselves. So give or take, there's about 2 cups of cooked black-eyed peas in here. And if you followed along per the instructions on the flyer, you should have some chopped red onion, some chopped tomatoes, some chopped jalapenos, and then a meat of your choice. So I've cut up this red onion very nicely, if I do say so myself. There's a lot more than I need in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and add the equivalent of about a half an onion into my cooked black-eyed peas. And then I'm using Roma tomatoes today. You could use any kind of tomato, but I just really like Roma tomatoes. They're smaller, a little bit sweeter. I feel like you get a lot more flesh than you do liquid or seeds per ratio of the tomato. So I'm going to put in about 1 tomato's worth to start. And this is one of those things that I like to always dice more ahead of time. That way, as I'm mixing it together, if I'm like looking at my dish and I think, oh, I'd like more onion, or oh, I like more tomato, I don't have to get out all of my equipment to chop more. So this is definitely a recipe that works really well, having your mise en place, which we talked about last week, ready. And mise en place, as a recap, is just having everything pre-cut, pre-measured, much like you see now. It's not just good for TV magic, it's good for real life. So I have the equivalent of about 1.5 Roma tomatoes, or 1 regular tomato, half an onion, 2 cups of black-eyed peas. And then my grocery store sells some beautifully smoked jowl, pork jowl. So I cooked that up ahead of time, and I cooked it with garlic. So if I was going to make this recipe as is without any meat, I like to saute my garlic. Raw garlic, depending on the garlic that you get, can kind of be a little spicy depending on where it is in its maturation process. So I kind of like to mellow it out. So I sauteed mine with my jowl. This would work really good with shredded chicken. It works really well as a vegetarian dish with absolutely no meat in there. I've done it with tofu once for an event, and that was also really nice. I'm not sure I would really recommend seafood, just because seafood has a more delicate flavor profile, but you never know. Try it and let me know how it turns out. I'm gonna put all of this jowl in there with the garlic. And when you're cutting up your vegetables and your mise en place, like the meats and stuff, the idea is for almost all of the elements in here to be similar in size or smaller than the cooked black-eyed pea. That way, when you go to take bites of this, you get a little bit of everything in every bite. And this is supposed to have 1 really finely minced jalapeno, but the jalapeno I had went bad. So I'm not going to put jalapenos in this particular one. I'm going to substitute it for cayenne pepper And that's just kind of part of the pandemic pantry. You just kind of do what you can with what you have. So I'm mixing all of this up. And as you can see, it's starting to look more kind of like a salad or a medley of ingredients. And based on what I'm looking at, I think I'm gonna add a tiny bit more onion, tiny bit more tomato. And so Texas caviar is something that we tend to serve at a lot of parties. We tend to serve it at a bunch of cookouts because it's a dish that if you serve it warm is a great main dish. And if you serve it chilled, it's equally as delicious. So it's almost like a really nice bean dip. So this is great for the Super Bowl. Last time I made this was actually for the Super Bowl. So I'm going to mix all of these ingredients, and that ratio looks a lot better. Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle it with a little bit of cayenne pepper. I like mine spicy. You can absolutely omit this if you have a more delicate palate. And then if anyone's familiar with Pico De Gallo, it's usually, you know, the white onion and the tomato, cilantro, sometimes depending on where you live, and then the lime juice, and you kind of let that sit and cure. So that's kind of the flavor profile we're going for, added in with everything else. But instead of lime juice, we're going to make a red wine vinaigrette. And my absolute favorite way to make vinaigrette is in a mason jar because it is the easiest way to emulsify almost anything. So the best ratio is always going to be 1 to 3 if you're just using standard vinegars, standard oils. So we're going to use 1 part vinegar. In this part, I have a tablespoon. So because I have so many beans and ingredients, I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. Put that in there. And then I'm going to use 6 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. And this is a dish that, like I said, I like it because it's very flexible. So say you like different beans. Maybe you are not partial to black-eyed peas. You could do this with navy beans, pinto beans, black beans, red beans, garbanzo beans, also known as chickpeas. I think that was 3. This is 4. Counting and talking is hard, guys. That's 6. I don't know. We'll do a little extra. And if it's off, then I'll just add more vinegar. So the bean itself can be modified, and you can use a ton of different beans. You can also use all different kinds of onion. Maybe other than red onion, you prefer sweet onion or, you know, just regular white onions. I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. And then they have all these different colored tomatoes now. You have black tomatoes, red tomatoes, green tomatoes. You could also go and change those. And traditionally, even though it usually has like a small amount of cilantro added, there's a lot of people that don't like cilantro. You could use basil. You can use mint. You can use parsley. You can use celery leaves. So I have my emulsified vinaigrette. And I am going to try it first, just to make sure I didn't overdo my oil ratio. It's a little heavy on the oil side. So I'm going to add a little more oil. And vinaigrettes are also really easily customizable. So you could make this with a vinaigrette you buy in a bottle. But if you want to make your own, like I said, the ratio is generally speaking 1 to 3 parts, 1 being the vinegar, 3 being the oil. And you can use white wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, rice wine vinegar. You can use avocado oil, coconut oil, all different kinds. So I'm going to just kind of dress this. We'll pour in about half of it. Give it a nice toss. And then I'm going to season it with a little salt and pepper. And then we will adjust accordingly. And this is one of those dishes that I really, if I'm going to serve it cold, I like to make it ahead of time. Put all of the seasonings in and then let it sit for about 12 hours at a minimum. Just because all those flavors really seep into the beans, really seep into the meat if you put meat in there, and just allows all the flavors to really come together a lot easier. But like I said, you can serve this warm, so it's not necessary to let it marinate. A little bit of salt. And there are just so many variations you can make. I've also made this where I put in avocado chunks right before I serve it. I've roasted up butternut squash, diced that really fine, put that in there. There's just a lot of different things you can do. And I know it doesn't seem like this would be a main dish, but trust me, Texans will eat anything as a main dish. So you just serve it with a bag of chips on the side and you have a main dish. So I'm gonna put a little bit here and taste it. So it definitely needs a little more vinaigrette. And honestly, even though vinaigrette is the traditional way to make it, I usually put vinaigrette all over it and then put a little bit of extra vinegar just because I like that acidic quality. I think it really brightens up the caviar. And the one I've made today, it's earthy, it's bright, which are usually contradictory, but because there's so many different ingredients, you get a lot of different flavor profiles coming through. I'll just show you what it kind of looks like. It should be nice and glistening. And it's just all of the different elements coming together. I'm gonna give it another little taste. Then in there. My other favorite way to eat this is dip a chip in queso, then dip it or pour some of the caviar on top. Oh, it's perfect. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the fridge to sit. So I'm going to be having this for dinner later. But this is basically Texas caviar. It's very simple. It's very humble because we're not big fish people. We do have a coast. We do have beaches, but they are not comparable to anywhere else, really. So this is our version of caviar. It has nothing to do with actual caviar, but it is delicious. So that's our first dish. Very simple, very easy to make on a scale for 1 person, 2 people, or 20. You just have to chop things a little bit more. The thing that takes the longest really is going to be your beans. And I've actually also made this with canned beans. So you could do that if you are going to use canned beans. So they usually come either marinated or in some kind of liquid. So unless you're using a flavored bean or a marinated bean, I highly recommend taking them out of the can, rinsing them thoroughly under water, and then making this. And if you use canned beans, I think they work better in the cold version so that they have a little bit more time to soak up all those flavors. And again, I would marinate for no less than about 12 hours. But that is Texas caviar. So we'll cover this with saran wrap. We're not sponsored by Glad, but it is by far my favorite plastic wrap. And we'll put that in the fridge for later. I also have queso in my fridge, so off camera, I will be acting like a little fat kid with queso and bean dip. All right. So in the interim, I thought we would talk about corn just a little bit. I have my skillets and my pots heating for the Marillenknodel. So I'm going to put some of my things away, create a little more space. So as far as corn goes, if you were in my cocktail class or watched it earlier, I made a really interesting cocktail based off of Mexican street corn. Tequila based, fresh corn kernels, had a bunch of spices where you can make a little spicy blend, a little bit of lime juice. And we actually made a corn husk infused simple syrup. So the thing I like about corn is that a lot of people just kind of dismiss it as a side dish or as just an element to put into other things. But the corn cob itself, if you buy the whole corn, is incredibly versatile. So I'm going to show you some of the things I've made with corn today because I'm super stoked. Let's see. I have a whiskey glass full of corn kernels because I'm running out of small things to put my things in. So I used these corn kernels that I cut off of the cob earlier for the cocktail class, So some of these went into the cocktail, but you could cut these off, use them in a stir fry, put them in a soup, put them on a sandwich, make some crazy scrambled eggs. Like there's so many things you can do with corn kernels, both raw, roasted, boiled, blended. There's some countries in South and Latin America that do smoothies with this because they just have a naturally sweet quality. So it allows you to substitute sometimes some of the sugar you might use. So you have corn kernels. We have corn silk. So my favorite trivia about corn silk, if you've ever handled a corn cob, they're such a pain. The best way to get your corn cob out of the cob of corn out of the corn itself is to, hold on, you might have a Facebook question. You take the corn cob, you trim the little curls of the corn silk, that'll be at the tip, and then you trim off the base of it. Put it in the microwave for 30 seconds to a minute tops, and then just kind of rotate the corn cob and pull it out, and it'll come out without any of the corn silk. That's a really good life hack. I personally don't like to do that just because I like my corn kernels to be super, super fresh. But if you want to take the time to do this without doing the microwave hack, you can get the corn silk. You can still get the silk using the microwave hack. But it's like this ball of corn hair, if you will. It's just a lot of strands. But yeah, my favorite trivia about these is when you open a corn cob, there is one strand of silk per kernel on the actual cob. Now, I've never taken the time to verify this because I guess I do have enough time because we're in quarantine, but I feel like that's something psychopaths do. Just sit around and count how many corn silk hairs and corn kernels were on a cob to see if they match. So whoever did that, thank you. I'm gonna just trust you and pass along this knowledge that I haven't verified. So I'm just gonna do that. But yeah, we have this is one cob of corn. So what you can do with this, if you take it fresh and you chop it up, you would use about, let me see what my ratios are. I think it's 1 tablespoon, yeah. So 1 tablespoon of fresh corn silk chopped up to 1 cup of water, and then you can make a tea. And you want to make sure your water doesn't come to a full boil. But why this is a nice tea to do is because it's high in potassium and vitamin K, which are not vitamins we necessarily get all of the time. This is a really easy way to get them. If you're a tea drinker, you could just add this in with any other tea you like. It'll add a nice nutty sweetness to it. You can also dry these and then chop them or grind them and then just save them and use them as tea, but then you would do half of the ratio. So you do a half tablespoon per cup of water once it's dry. Or you can even saute them in a stir fry. I personally am not super partial to that just because even though you cook them, the stringy texture is still there. If I'm going to have them stringy like this, I like to fry them because they crisp up really nice and then they create these nests like this that you can kind of place things on and they look beautiful. But if I'm going to use them in a stir fry, I definitely chop them up first. So corn silk, high in potassium, high in vitamin K, really good for you. Stop throwing it away. Dry it, make some tea, or dry it, send it to some friends as a care package. Plus, it's really pretty. So we have corn silk. Then I'm going to show y'all one of the little things I did today with the corn husks. So this is not part of our regular programming, but we're going to do it anyway. I have these corn husks. And when you have an ear of corn, usually the first 4 to 6 leaves are really tough. They can have some discoloration because they've been exposed more to air and other things. Sometimes they also tend to absorb flavors from the outside just because they are more in contact with the outside. So when I have an ear of corn, I like to remove the first 4 to 6 leaves, depends on the ear of corn. And then I'll wait until they're like a lighter green / pale yellow. And then I'll just peel them off like this. So I have a couple here. And then these are great if you like to make tamales. If you know how to make tamales, you can take these, dry them, and then store them, and you don't have to buy corn husks when you go to make tamales. And corn is usually a summer thing, and tamales are usually a winter thing. So it's a really cool way to take something, have it for later, and not have to spend extra money. But my favorite way to use them in the summer is to make little grill packets. So I have in this little ramekin, I have some mussels, a little bit of chopped fennel, a little bit of chopped celery leaves, some cherry tomatoes, and some bell peppers. Now, some of this was left over from my cocktail class. Some of this was just in my vegetable drawer. But I just made a cute little medley. And that's about 6 mussels. These ones are already cooked. That's just what my store had in stock. You could definitely use raw. You could definitely use any other seafood, shrimp, fish, what have you. I don't think I would do this with red meat just because it would take too long to cook, especially if you're grilling. If you were baking it, then that's okay. But it does work well with chicken and pork. You just want to cut smaller quantities. And the whole concept of doing this is based on a French technique called a papillote, where they take a parchment paper and basically create an envelope that's sealed and puffs up and has all these flavors in there. So I'm going to unroll one of my corn husks. And if you don't have a wide one like this, then you want to take, because they're not all the same, right? Vegetables and fruit aren't perfect. So we have a smaller one here. And if I was going to do that, then I would take a second one and just kind of overlap them. So we'll do that because I know it's going to be a little bit harder than the big one. So I'll show you the hard way because the other way is easier. So we have them rolled out like that. I'm going to put my array of ingredients right in the middle. And then you can add, for the ones that I made before, I will show you them in a minute. I added just a very, very small, thin slice of butter and a little bit of smoked Maldon sea salt. So then I'm going to just roll these up like a little Christmas package. And for good measure, just because I'm trying to do movie magic so it looks nice, I'm going to put these in the big, thicker one. And then I used some twine to tie these up. And if you wanted to, you could just skewer them on the ends. That way they'd be more appropriate for the grill. Twine will definitely burn. But because I'm going to put mine in the oven, I had them like this. They're filled and rolled. I fold in the edges like this. And then we get these lovely little corn packets. This is an awesome little appetizer. There's about 4 to 6 mussels in each one, the equivalent of about 1 cherry tomato. I have flies in my house because it's summer and I live in an old house and they won't leave. I'm so sorry. But we have these cute little corn packets. So I'm going to pop these in the oven while we get ready for our actual other dish. And I have my oven on about 300. And because the mussels are already cooked, they won't need that long. If they were raw, it would definitely take a little bit longer. But it's a really cute way to make appetizers, a really good use of ingredients. So as you can tell, we've gone through corn kernels, corn silk, corn husks. What about the cob, right? The cob is the other part. So I have this corn cob here. And this is the one that I cut the kernels off of. It's been in my oven drying all day. I definitely would recommend that for 1 cob. And this is probably not as dry as I would like it. I would probably dry it for a couple more hours. But if you have these, don't throw them away. My favorite thing to make with these is stock. Now, you don't have to dry them for the stock. You can just take a fresh corn cob, chop it into smaller pieces. I did that with a different cob today. I chopped it into 3. It was the same size. And then that stock is beautiful for little simple things like risotto or certain grains if you're cooking barley or rice, because it just adds this beautiful light sweetness. So let's see, what are the other ones? I wrote down a few other things that we can use them for. Let me get my note card. A lot of information I want to give you guys. So the corn cobs are great when you have that broth or that stock that you made. The stock that I made today, I'm saving for risotto. So I took a corn cob, I added in some bay leaves, some enzyme and onion that I had. And you want to use at least 3 of these per quart of water. But once you have them, once you have the stock, if you haven't put anything else in it and it's just corn, great to poach eggs in, great for risotto, beautiful to amp up chowder and soups because we already use vegetables in them. It just adds an extra sweet note to anything rather than just a standard vegetable stock. But the reason I tried it, and this is my favorite, and this might just be me as a Texan, I like to set shit on fire. So I'm going to take this, continue to dry it, and then I'm going to chop it into probably 3 pieces again. But take all your corn cobs, dry them, and then put them on your grill when you light your charcoals or when you do your smoking chips, because it'll add this really nice sweet tone to the smoke that you use. Plus, they're great fire starters. So, little hack, corn cobs. So that completes all of the things you can do with corn. If you guys come up with other stuff, I'd love to hear it. And we're going to move forward into Marillenknodel. I do see a couple questions about the Texas Caviar. The question was, do I need any emulsifier for my vinaigrette? No. If your ratios of acid to oil stay close to the 1 to every 3, it will emulsify on its own as long as you are either whisking it quickly, blending it quickly using an immersion blender, or like my technique, the mason jar. So as you can see, it has started to separate, but it's pretty emulsified still on the top. And then if you do it in a mason jar and you make your own, and you just put it back in the fridge, just give it a quick shake anytime you want to use it. It's good to go. And vinaigrettes, like I said, you can change the oils, change the vinegar, but you can also put some minced garlic in here, some fresh herbs, different spices, maybe like paprika, cumin, other things, and customize it. So vinaigrette is awesome. So I'm going to move this. We'll move on to Marillenknodel. So this is a dish that I'm super excited about. This is one of my favorite dishes I've ever learned to make. Make sure I'm not missing anything. I have these quiet Facebook notifications on. But early on in my career, I realized that it was very hard to continue my learning based on where I lived. I was living in Central America, and the culinary scene there was just a little bit behind the times. And the country I was living in, which was Costa Rica, is not as rich culturally because it's a younger country in, say, comparison to like Mexico or Peru. So being someone that didn't have a lot of access to money or really good contacts, I went a little crazy, and I decided to get online and contact anybody who I could find an email for and be like, hey, could you talk to anybody in your family, see if they want to teach me how to cook? I want to learn with like someone's grandmother or aunt, you know, somebody that's just been cooking their whole life. So Marillenknodel is something I learned when I was in Austria. And I love the way that I learned it because it was very unorthodox, also very frustrating, but also very entertaining. So Marillenknodel means apricot dumpling. And the lady that taught me this, we were in her apartment building in the countryside in Vienna. She smoked heavily and watched Monk. And we could only cook on commercial breaks. And she had a cigarette hanging out of her mouth the whole time. She spoke no English. And I was watching her make these apricot dumplings. And I saw she had this host of apricots like this that just don't have a seed. And there's no real incision mark. There's a small opening here, but not enough to pull a seed out. And I was baffled with all of my culinary knowledge. I could not figure out how she got these. So she had bags of these in her freezer. So if you are going to make this later on, what she does is she gets all the apricots, takes the seeds out. I think she had bags of a dozen. So she probably used like a quart bag or a gallon bag and laid them all in and then just put them in the freezer ready to go for whenever she wants to make Marillenknodel year round. But I couldn't figure out how she got these seeds out of the apricot. So I asked her, how do you get the seed? And I had to do a lot of hands and drawings to get the question across, but she's like, oh, yes, I will tell you, basically, is I think what she said. So she picks up an apricot like so, complete with seed, as you can see. Obviously, the seed's not in this one. Seed is in this one. And she says, fruit. I'm like, fruit, I understand. Got the fruit. She says, spoon. I don't know if that's actually how you say it in German. I highly doubt it. It's spoon. And I was like, okay, so she has a wooden spoon like this. If you grew up in the South, you might be familiar with this from a couple butt whoopings growing up. The key to using the wooden spoon is you need one with a round handle. And then she looks me in the eye, puts the spoon ladle on her belly button. Bear with me, I know this looks weird. The part of the apricot that would have the stem, you want to make sure that stem is removed if it does have it. And then you're going to place this on the stem of the spoon. And then she locked eyes with me and just did this. And the apricot seed, she does it with a lot more force. I'm trying to make sure it stays in frame. But she grunted very heavily, thrusted towards this fruit, and the seed shot halfway across the living room, and I died of laughter. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. So this is how you get the seeds out. If you ever look this recipe online, nobody does this. This is like a very country classic method. Everyone else slices the fruit open, removes the seed, and the problem with that is that the fruit does not get as juicy once you cook it. So please remember this technique. I have broken a few spoons in the process, but it's totally worth it every time. I want to say 10 years of having this recipe, probably broken only about 3 spoons. But you pull the spoon out and you have this, oh look, you can see there with the camera, I think a little. Yeah, you have this beautiful orifice that maintains as much of the fruit as possible intact. So I have prepared a few of these ahead of time. I think I did 2. Then I have 3. So the recipe I'm going to give you guys today is for a dozen apricots. I'll be doing about a half batch. So if you have trouble dialing it back or lessening your ratios, just let me know. I can do the math for you. So once you have your apricots ready, you want to use a sugar cube. You can use a Demerara sugar cube, a brown sugar cube, but a sugar cube is the best way. I've had times where I've made this and I don't have access to sugar cubes. I know some countries don't sell them. In that case, you want to try and funnel about a teaspoon or a half teaspoon of sugar into your apricot. But remember, it's open on the bottom, so you kind of want to do it in an angle and make sure it just kind of sits in there. But if you have the sugar cube, it's quite easy. You go through the fatter end where the seed came out, you just push it right into the middle, and it'll now be inside the fruit. So I'm going to do that with the 3 that I punched the seed from. Put that sugar cube right in the middle. And later we'll get to why we do this. So I have 3 apricots, sugar cubes in the middle. Now for the dough, most important part. The dough that goes around a Marillenknodel is potato based, very similar to a gnocchi. So I have about 250 grams. So if you guys are doing a dozen recipe, then it's going to be about a half kilo, 500 grams or a little bit over a pound of mashed potatoes. And the potato choice is super important. Starchier potatoes do better. So russets are by far the starchiest. However, I don't really like how bland they are. I feel like they don't take in as much flavor as other potatoes. My favorite for this recipe would be Yukon Gold. Pandemic Pantry is using New England potatoes because that's what's available. And they work just as well. They're not as starchy. They're a little bit gummier, but the texture will be fine. So I have my potatoes peeled and mashed. I baked these. I really, really love this recipe if you steam the potatoes first, but we're not going to do that. I baked mine. You can boil them as well. You just want to make sure you peel them, mash them. If you have a ricer, that's even better. Definitely do not use a food processor. I would rather you mash them by hand with a fork if you don't have a potato masher than with a food processor because they tend to get too gummy from the amount of speed that's going on in there. So we have our mashed potatoes. So if you're writing this down at home, it's going to be a kilo / a little more than a pound / 500 grams potatoes. Okay. Then you're going to use 1 whole egg, and you're going to do most of your wet ingredients first because your flour ratios are going to vary depending on how starchy your potatoes are. So we have 1 whole egg, and then I have 15 grams of butter. Sorry, for you guys, it would be 30 grams of butter. So that's the equivalent of 2 tablespoons. Usually if you have a stick of butter, it'll have it written on the package. So I have 2 tablespoons of butter and 1 egg. I'm gonna put that in. And then I'm gonna get a little fork. Start mashing this. The butter is room temp. It's gonna help it mix a lot better. You can do this in a mixer if you would like, if you have like a stand mixer. Definitely recommend using the paddle attachment. You can do this with a potato masher to really get all of the egg and the butter really incorporated. I'm going to switch to my hands here in a bit. That's my favorite way to do it because it's much easier to see where the texture of the potatoes are and the dough once it starts to form. So right now, this is just a really wet mashed potato. Okay. And then my secret ingredient is lemon zest. You do not have to put this in there. It's entirely fine without it, but I really like the way it brightens everything else up. So I've zested 1 lemon and put that in there. Mix that in. And then, oh, I put my salt away, but we do need a pinch of salt. So, let's see. Just a little bit of salt. And then you're going to use flour. And if you have access to semolina, that makes the best texture. I don't have access to semolina, so I'll tell you what I'm using instead. But if you only have flour, you're going to use 150 grams of flour approximately. Again, it will depend on your potato. If you have semolina, you're going to use 120 grams of flour and then 30 grams of semolina. But because I don't have semolina, I am going to use, I like the mixture of corn and flour. So I'm using this. This is usually something you can find in the Mexican section or the Hispanic section of your grocery store. It is a special fine ground corn flour that they use for arepas in Colombia and Venezuela. So I'm using 120 grams of all-purpose flour and 30 grams of this corn flour. It's not really cornmeal. It's much finer than the cornmeal that we use for cornbread in the United States. So I have that mixed here, and I'm gonna put a little bit in there. And this is where I'm gonna switch to my hands so I can make sure my texture is correct. So I'm gonna just kind of start folding that in. And the texture we're going for is malleable, but holds its shape. So you don't want it too sticky. So like right now, way too sticky. We're gonna just keep kneading, add a little more. And it's always better to add in small amounts. You can always add more, but if you go too far and it gets too dry, it's kind of hard to just bake up another potato. But let's just say you don't listen to Chef Chandler and you went and put all of the flour in here anyway, and now it's too dry. What do we do then? If that's the case, you have a couple options. You can add in a little bit of a soft cheese, like a tablespoon at a time of mascarpone. I always say it wrong. I always say mascarpone, but it's mascarpone. So you can do mascarpone, you can do ricotta, you can do a tiny bit of sour cream. Traditionally in Austria, they would use quark, but we don't really have that in the US, at least not in every city. So more readily available, we definitely have ricotta, mascarpone, sour cream, even cream cheese. And that'll actually add a nice little tartness. So no, y'all can't see it yet, but it's starting to hold its shape as I'm mixing it rather than sticking to the bowl. So I have this, and it's almost where I want it. So I'm just gonna give y'all a peek. So this is my dry hand, because the mixing hand is always kind of a liar. So if I take this, and I take a pinch, and I put it between my fingers, you see the top finger doesn't really have a bunch of mix on it or dough on it. It's just kind of tactile. It's not really visible. That's a good place to be. I like mine just a tiny bit drier. I'm gonna do maybe another teaspoon of my flour mix. And I'm gonna put that, mix that in there. And then we're basically gonna clean our hands, which is super important right now with the current situation. Wash your hands. And then we're gonna wrap our apricots. So I have my potato dough. I'm gonna wash my fingers. And it's really good to get a plate to put these on so that you can take it over to the stove for when you need to actually cook these. So to roll these, you're gonna put a little bit of flour on your hands. I have a little bit left over from my mix, so that's perfect. So you wanna flour your hands. You wanna take about a golf-sized ball amount, give or take a little more, I guess. I don't play golf, that's probably not a golf ball. But You want to flatten it out a little. And if you need more flour, definitely use more flour on your hands, just a little, or directly onto the dough. So you're trying to make it as thin as possible without really breaking through. We're going to take one of our apricots that has the sugar cube in it, and we're just going to kind of mold this around. And you can add more pieces of dough later, so it's okay if it's not enough to start out. The reason we start with a golf ball size is because we don't really have all the same size apricots. So as you can see, this isn't going to be big enough. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm going to need a little more flour. And you can do this with other stone fruits. I find that if you do it with peaches, they tend to get enormous. So this is already about the size of a baseball. But you can definitely still do it with peaches. It's really nice with plums. You can do these with smaller stone fruits, such as cherries, but then you have to like cut up your sugar cubes so they're a little bit smaller. You also have to pit them with an actual pitter. And then it's a lot of work for each little individual bite. I've tried it. I don't think it's worth it. So this is going to be basically our end product. It's like a baseball, but inside's a little surprise. So I'm going to do another one of these. Now on the stove, I have a pot of water with salt, and I've had it heating for a while, but it is very strong simmer / boil. So the way to cook these is we're going to boil them until they float. But before we do that, I'm going to teach you how to prepare the topping. So we have our apricots. I'm going to take another one that has a little sugar cube inside, put it right in there, and then just slowly work around the dough. Remember, use flour if you need it. Helps you spread that dough out a little bit better. Trying to encase the whole fruit. This one needs just a tiny bit. And the really important part is when you have the part where the seed came out, where you put the sugar cube in, that's the part that has the most amount of cut surface. So you want to make sure that the seal over that part, or the dough covering that part, is really nicely covered. If there's going to be a hole anywhere, that's definitely not the place for it because it'll pop open. So I'm gonna do that. This is just a very touch and feel type of process. The more you do this, the better you'll get. But I have two little dumplings. We're going to make these in a minute. I'm going to put these on my plate. Sorry about that. And I'm going to take these over to the stove. I'm going to rinse my hands and bring you with me. So what we're going to be taking over to the stove, when the Marillenknodel get cooked, they're damp on the outside because it's like a damp potato, and they get rolled in these seasoned toasted breadcrumbs, which are amazing. So for that, just so you can take notes, you will be needing 100 grams of breadcrumbs, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and then the ground baking spice of your choice. I just have it already mixed in here. This is the breadcrumbs, sugar, and spice. I'm using freshly ground allspice, which is my particular favorite for this recipe. Cardamom in this is amazing. Cinnamon is good. It's very good. I just really love allspice and apricot together. But you can use anything. I've even tried like a combination of the 3, or pumpkin pie spice if that's what you have on hand and you will use it for Thanksgiving. You can use black pepper, but you definitely want to use the spice that you like. And then you can also swap out the white sugar for brown sugar if you so choose. So I just have them already mixed up here. And then I have 40 grams or 80 grams of butter, which would be the equivalent of about 5 tablespoons. And we're going to toast those up really nicely. And then when the Marillenknodel is done, then we are going to roll them through there. So come with me to the stove. Tour Chandler's kitchen. So, the stove. I have the Marillenknodel. I have my water that's been boiling. It's a little low. I'm going to add some more water because it's been on for quite a while. And then bring it back to a boil. It should be fairly easy. You want to make sure you have at least 4 to 6 inches of water in your pot, just because it has to be at least as deep as the dumplings, but also with enough room for them to rise. So while we're waiting for that, go going to light my skillet. And we are going to add in our butter, which, like I said, is about 5 tablespoons, almost a whole stick, but not quite. I'm going to melt that down. And then we're going to have our flour, spice, and breadcrumbs, sugar, and spice mix on hand to toast up in the butter. So this is a dish. Tool-wise, you just need a skillet and a pot. It's really handy to have a slotted spoon, such as this, to be able to remove the dumplings from the boiling water. They don't really have to be patted dry or anything like that. Like when you're frying up things, we're going to take them from the water and then put them directly into our toasted breadcrumbs. But we'll get to that in a minute. So we're just going to wait for our butter to melt. Another way to also modify this recipe would be to use other kinds of potatoes. I've tried this once with sweet potatoes. I liked it quite a bit, but I liked it more with plum than I did apricot. The apricot on sweet potato was a little too sweet for my taste. You could also try different fats. I've tried this with olive oil as opposed to butter. It was very nice. You can really toast the breadcrumbs in anything. So if you are trying to stay on a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, you can definitely choose a non-animal based fat. Also, this is a beautiful recipe for people with a gluten-free allergy, because they do sell gluten-free breadcrumbs now. And if not, you can make gluten-free bread, buy gluten-free bread or crackers, make your own breadcrumbs. So I have the butter toasted. I'm going to sprinkle in my breadcrumbs, sugar, and allspice. And then I'm going to just kind of stir them around so they all get pretty moistened. And I have this on a medium heat. As you can see, they kind of start to clump up as they soak up all that butter. And then we're just going to slowly let them toast. They're going to just do their thing. Now, if you are doing this and these happen to be not ready, but your dumplings are for whatever reason, your dumplings will still stay moist on the outside, and you can just put them back on the original plate where they came from. So you just want to make sure to stir these occasionally, not crazy all the time. You will be able to tell that they're starting to toast by the aroma. So I'm going to remove our lid here. As you can see, our water is starting to simmer. It's not fully at a boil yet. I'm going to let it get a little hotter before I put those dumplings in. In a pot like this, I would do no more than 2 dumplings at a time. That's a medium saucepan. In a large pasta pot, you could do as many as 8, I would say, at a time, and then use maybe a pasta strainer to pull them out instead of a slotted spoon. But this is definitely one of those dishes that you can prepare ahead of time, having the apricots ready, the dough ready, and then just making them to order. Oh, our little mussel packets in the oven with the corn husks smell delicious and look amazing. You guys to see it, just so you guys can see what I'm saying. Those in there. Oh, those are gonna be so great. I'm super excited for this. I know y'all forgot about this, didn't you? Because I did temporarily, and then I smelled them. So, have our dumplings over here. And as these breadcrumbs start to toast, they will clump up less because they're getting drier. So our butter is bubbling nicely. I'm going to put both of our dumplings in there. And just kind of give them a little swish. And then they're going to cook for a little bit. And the beauty, my favorite thing about this recipe is the fruit itself doesn't cook. It gets warm rather than actually getting soft. So that sugar cube that we talked about, putting it in the center, the reason we do that is that sugar helps add a little bit of moisture as it starts to melt inside the fruit. So it also brings out all of the juices inside the fruit because it's almost like it's steaming from the inside out. And then sugar tends to draw out moisture. So if you have sugar and then the juices or the fruit is juicy, the sugar is going to pull those juices towards the center, so that when we cut into one of those, it's just going to be so moist inside, but it's also not going to be mushy. It's just going to be like it's been sitting in the sun and it's perfectly sun-kissed. And because this has butter and sugar, I'm not entirely sure if y'all can see, but there's two different tones of brown because sugar and butter will brown quickly. So once you start to see those colors, you definitely want to stir a little more often. I'm gonna give this a little thing. And I wish you guys could be here. The aromas in my kitchen right now. I smell the lemon zest. I smell allspice. Oh, I smell sweetness from the corn husks roasting in the oven and the sugar and the breadcrumbs. Oh, so sweet. I love this dish. It is so, so tasty. And it also tastes a lot better when there's not a crazy old lady smoking cigarettes all day next to you while cooking this. Something about the lack of cigarette smoke, I guess, makes this even more appealing. Still toasting our breadcrumbs. And the dish, honestly, the dumplings themselves, almost everything in there is ready to go, right? The potatoes have already been cooked. The apricot, like I said, we're not trying to actually cook it through. So what we're really waiting for is the egg to reach a cooking point. We're also waiting for the sugar inside the apricot to be able to melt and get juicy. But each dumpling is going to cook for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. And usually you'll just see them rise to the surface like any other pasta related thing that has potatoes or egg in it. They tend to float. So you can see the breadcrumbs are getting nice and brown. Still not quite as toasty as I like mine very crispy. Another variation that I've done of this is also to add in crispy chopped bacon. If you're one of those people that like sweet and savory, that's a really nice addition as well. And we're going to end up serving these traditionally today with powdered sugar. You can do all kinds of things. If you are into cooking with alcohol like I am, these go beautifully with a bourbon glaze. But powdered sugar is the traditional way. And I like for people that study with me to really know the traditional way so you have a really good jumping off point for when you want to start experimenting. So we're almost there, getting a really nice dark brown, which is going to create a beautiful contrast for the powdered sugar. Give these a little stir. These are coming along very nicely. And turn our breadcrumbs down just a little because they start to brown faster and faster the darker they get. Scientifically, sugar likes sugar. So once one little molecule starts to brown or caramelize, all of them like to join the party, which is why it's so easy to burn things that have sugar. So you just want to slow it down as much as possible if you don't have a lot of skill handling things with sugar. So that's about where I like it. Really nice and brown. It's similar to a molasses color. I'm not sure if it comes across that way on the screen, but it's definitely not burnt. It's just a really nice dark brown. So I'm going to turn that off. And remember, your pan is still hot. So if you just kind of leave this here and don't stir it around, it's going to continue to cook and you risk burning things. So you still want to give it a couple stirs as the pan starts cooling. Because you've done all that beautiful work. Oh, these are almost ready. They look amazing. I'm going to get a little serving plate ready. So, things here. So these are just about done. I'm going to take one of them. And as you can see, or maybe you guys can't, let's see. I'm going to bring it a little closer. They look a little shiny. There's a lot of steam coming off of that. But they're moist. They just look like a potato would look if you cooked it. So they're damp and wet looking. I'm going to put it directly into the pan. And then just kind of roll it around to try and coat it with some of those breadcrumbs. Give it a little help if it needs it. Put that on our plate. Definitely don't use your bare hands like Chef Chandler. I make a lot of mistakes. Do as I say, not as I do. This works best if you've already browned your breadcrumbs and then let them cool. I'm gonna have this one over here, and we'll do these breadcrumbs later. But in the interest of movie magic, we're just gonna go with the quick and dirty way. So come with me, travel back over here. So my little Venmo up there in case anybody does want to tip me. This is my new job. Just get a couple of these things out of the way. Then show you what this looks like. So we have this beautiful little dumpling ball with our breadcrumbs on it. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to dust things with powdered sugar is holding like their strainer or whatever their mechanism for dusting is directly on top of the item they want to dust and then putting the powdered sugar in there. And if you do that, then just a big waft of the sugar is going to come out and not be really nice. It's just going to be like clumped. So the best way to do it is over a secondary container, like so. We'll have our strainer, put some sugar in it, and then put it over our dish and just very lightly dust. Or if you're like me, you go a little overboard. So if I'm doing this for breakfast, I use a little less powdered sugar. If I'm doing it for dessert, I put a little more. So we're gonna do that. It's our little dust. And then I don't feel like this class would be complete unless y'all get to see how it looks on the inside. And this can be served as is, warm, good to go. And it is as good as like serving hot apple pie. But I do like to let it come down to temperature just a little bit because the inside is really, really warm. But in the interest of time, because I know we've run over an hour just because I tried to give you guys all these little corn tidbits, I'm gonna stick my fork in there. You see all those textures just coming apart. And then we have this beautiful, beautiful Marillenknodel, guys. See that? Just lovely. And now you can see our sugar cube hasn't fully dissolved. And that is because my water level was a little too low when I was boiling these. So it was hard for it to really get that even heat, but still gonna taste delicious. So that's Marillenknodel. And one more thing before we go. We have our mussel packets that have been in the oven. We'll pull out our little mussel packets and sit with you guys so you guys can see them up close. So you can tell, or maybe you can't, my lighting's kind of terrible, but there's different colors on the husk now, and that's because they've roasted as they've cooked. I'm gonna take one and open it. These are really hot, they're straight from the oven. We have these wonderful little packets, and these are beautiful on the grill. Again, if you do them on the grill, don't use twine, it will burn. Just use skewers. And then we have these wonderful little leaves. And then let's see, I'm gonna use my Marillenknodel fork because who cares? It's the pandemic. So we open these and all of those little ingredients are in there nice and cooked, really well seasoned and good to go. Little appetizer. So guys, that is our pandemic pantry class today. Thank you for tuning in. If anyone out there is inclined to tip or support an out-of-work bartender or chef, my handle at Venmo is @ctomayko, TOMAYKO. I don't do this just for the money. I really do this because it's keeping me sane. And I know the world is crazy out there and it seems like it's burning down quite literally. So if you need distractions, life is hard, but food and drinks don't have to be. Come and see me. I cook once a day, mix up once a day. So Sundays we do double class at 3 and 6. Pandemic Pantry, Pandemic Pen Up Happy Hour on Facebook and the Underground Cooking Club. So feel free to tune in and let me know your thoughts. If you have any trouble at all, please reach out. I really want to make sure everybody's able to make these at home. But yeah, thank you for joining. Hope the rest of y'all's day is great. I'm going to turn off the Facebook Live, so just message me later, guys. Bye.